Hello everyone. Continuation to the lecture Introduction to Database Management System. In this lecture, we will see what is data model and what are the types of data model. Data model is defined underlying the structure of database is a data model. As you know, database is a collection of integrated data. So if you want to store such integrated data, we require a structure of the database, and such structure of database is nothing but we call as data model. So data model is a collection of conceptual tool for describing data, data relationship, data semantics and consistency constraint. So in short, data model is nothing but it defines the structure that how data is organized, how it is stored. It defines what is the relation among that data. It defines what the semantics for data means, a type of that data, and is there any constraint is applied on that data. Everything is defined by a tool, and that tool is called as data model. So whenever you are storing a database, you first need to choose one of the data model which will define this, that is tool which defining the data, describing data, relationship, semantics and consistency constraint. So data model is nothing but define a design at view level, physical level and logical level. So there are many data models are available. So the mainly data model categorized into 4 categories. Relational model, first relational model, second entity relationship model, third object-based data model, fourth is semi-structured data model. Now we'll see one by one. First is the relational model. A relational model, it uses a collection of table to represent both the data and the relationship among those data. As you know, database is a collection of data and their relationship. Both the things in this relational model are represented by a collection of table, where each table has a multiple column and each column has a unique name. So whenever in a database, if you want to store any record, that record by using relational model, it is stored as a table. Only requirement that table should have a unique name. In that table, it has a multiple column, that every column also having each column having a unique name. So relational model is an example of record based model. It is record based model because a database is a fixed format of record of several types, and such a fixed structure format is represented by for a record, it is represented by a table. So each table contains a record of particular type. So whenever we store a record which having a particular type, a same record, related record will store, same type of record is only stored in that table only. If the record is different, we create another table which store the information. So in short, relational model will store all the record information in form of table. Each records type defines fixed number of fields or attribute. So whenever you store a record in the table, every record having fixed number of attributes, a fixed number of attribute. That attribute corresponds to the column of your table. So when we consider record which having the attribute, record name is nothing but we have a table, and the record attributes which are the fields of record we called as the columns of that attribute. Okay, that the columns of that table. A relational model is widely used data model. A vast majority of current database system is based on the relational model. So relational model is basically a practical model which is used in the many database system. Relational model is at the lower level abstraction than the ER model. Many times database designer carried out the design in ER model, and then once the diagram with ER model is ready, that ER model is translated into the relational model. So at the last, for the practical purpose, it uses a relational model. So it means in the relational model, everything, whichever records we store in database, all the records store in form of table. This is an example. This diagram represent. Suppose there is a one record of customer. I want to store the customer record, and that every customer record having a field customer ID, name, street and city. So if these information I want to store in database by using a relational data model, so in this relational model, the customer will stored as with a customer table, because relational model allowed to store everything in terms of table. So the customer, it will store information in the customer table. So customer record stored in customer table. So name of table is customer, and the columns of these customers are nothing but the attribute of this customer, which is a field of the customer, which is customer ID, name, street and city. A row of this table represent one of the record of that customer table. So each row different row represent the different records of customer type only. Like another example, like suppose if you want to store the account record information, so in the relation model it's stored as a account table with column as a account number and balance, which are the fields of account record, and the rows of that particular table represent the different account information which having the account number and balance. Likewise, depositor which store the information of customer and account. So this is the way. So that is in a relational model, database is nothing but a collection of different table. That table represent a different records. Okay. Next, a next model, as you know, the today's software development is most of this based on the object oriented programming. So because of this importance of object oriented programming, it leads a new data model which is object based data model. Basically it is there are two object based data models, object oriented data model and object relational data model. Object oriented data model is another data model that has been increasing attention. So in object oriented model can be extending the ER model with the notion of encapsulation method and object identity. So so whenever we have ER model, the extension of ER model with addition of encapsulation method and object identity, which is the OOP features, if I add with the ER model, that took that model which called as object oriented model. And the next is the object relational data model, which combine the feature of object oriented data model and the relational data model. So whenever object oriented data model is ready, if I add the new features, if we add the features of relational data model, which is a table representation column as we have seen in the relational data model, if I combine the feature of relational data model and object oriented, it will derive the data model is called as object relational data model. So these are the two object based data model. And the next is the semi-structured data model. It permits the specification of data where individual data item of same type may have different set of attributes. So this is exact contrast with the data model we have discussed earlier, where in the previous model we are expecting that we are storing the record of same type, but that every record should have a same set of attribute. Like we have seen the previous diagram, when I go with the customer as a record, it will that customer table only allow with the customer information, that all customer entity rows which all having the same attribute, which is ID, name, street and city. But in the semi-structure, the new thing with the semi-structure, it allowed to store the same type but may have different set of attribute. Means it will store a record, but every record stored in semi-structure way, it will differentiate with the number of attributes also. So the extensible markup language, which is XML, which is widely used to represent semi-structured data, in which the nodes of XML represent a record, so that every node may be varying the number of attributes, but they belongs to the same type. So this is the one more type of data model, semi-structured data model. And the last model is before the last model is one basically there is also two additional models also used with extension of relational model, which is historically there are two data model, network data model and hierarchical data model, which is preceded to the relational data model. But these model are very closely tied to the implementation, and it will complete the task of modulating the design in the network data model and hierarchical data model. So as a result, these type of model are used now, except the old database code, it will only use there, but these two type of models are oldly used. But in recent database system, only a relational database data model and the ER model mostly used. And the last is the ER, entity relationship model, which called as ER model. So ER model is basically represent the collection of basic object. That object are called as entities and a relation among those objects. So actually the name entity relationship model itself represent the meaning, which is entity relation. So it is a representation of entity and the relationship. So it is nothing but a collection of entity and represent the relation among these entity. But for that you must know what is entity and relationship. The entity is nothing but a thing or object in the real world. So in the real world, whichever the object, which is a real object in the world available, that object we call as entity. That entity should be distinguished from another object. For example, a person, a student, teacher, a bank account. These are called as real object, or watch. These are the real object which called as entity, and that every object is differentiated by their properties. So every entity, like every entity is described by a set of attributes, is described by their properties, and the properties of entities are called as attribute. Like for example, suppose if I want to describe the account, I will use the property of account, account number, account holder name, account balance. So these are the attribute which represent the entity. So every entity having is described by the set of attribute. For example, a bank account having account number and balance. These are the attribute of bank account. So some attribute of that entity may use to identify uniquely entities among the set, and the relationships are nothing but the association. As you know, different entities are available, so many entities are related to each other. So the entity, the associations among that entity, is represented by the relation. Such a collection of entity and their relationship, entity in the object, and whatever the relations, the object association, that is a related association between the entities, a combination of this representation of entity and their relationship is represented by the entity relationship model. So in detail, in the next lecture we'll go with the entity relationship model. Thank you for watching the video.